The Veterans Memorial in Silver Spring Township was dedicated on November 11th at 11 o'clock in 2011. We began in 2007 planning for a memorial somewhere in Silver Spring Township that would honor all of our veterans. We had a contest that had submissions from all over the world, and we chose this one because we thought it was the best one. We called it the obstacle course because you have to negotiate through it. The architect intended that the overlapping walls would symbolize the protection of each service that it gives to the homeland, represented by the flags and the reflecting pool. The memorial was designed by Matt Leone of Lynn Architects in Media, Pennsylvania. He was a young man, and this was one of his first commissions. The landscaper was Jane Keel of the English Garden in Carlisle, PA. The general contractor was Pottinger Contracting, and it was built to last. The architect stated that this memorial was designed and constructed to last just as our military has and continues to stand. The slab is 20 by 50 poured concrete over steel rebar and is laid on top of packed gravel. The weight of the concrete is approximately 3 tons, and the gravel was also approximately 3 tons. We could have placed the memorial anywhere in the township. We have 6 parks, and we looked at each one of them when we decided to place it. Willow Mill Park was suggested by the architect. The memorial sits along Gwinnett Creek, and it was placed on a hilltop to overlook the creek, but it is also out of the floodplain. The original cost, as it was designed, was approximately $150,000. But as time went on and commodity prices raised, the final cost was approximately $250,000. All the money was raised with private and corporate donations. No tax dollars were used, and it continues to be funded by private donations. We raised a lot of money. New Kingston Fire Company held turkey dinners for us several years. We had lots of sales at summer festivals. We've sold t-shirts. We have an annual golf tournament. We've also been the recipient of someone's life insurance policy and many, many donations. Donations for bricks are $100, and plaques based on the price of the donation get you a granite plaque along the walls, which you will see later. The bricks commemorate a veteran or just a good thought by the donator. The order of the walls of the memorial are based on the reach of the service of each inner wall, more protective of the flag representing the homeland, and the outer wall representing the more expeditionary manner of that service. As Matt Leone, the architect, said at the dedication ceremony, the walls are aligned in order of responsive engagement. The attractive aspect of the design was that the viewer must interact with it by walking through it, thereby experiencing it and being part of it. The walls are 8 by 16 of materials representing the strengths of each service, about a foot thick. Matt said that the memorial's dedication, the walls are the embodiment of the sacrifice, achievement, and strength of all those American veterans. Through the walls, everything has a purpose and meaning, and the human scale and space of the memorial provides for the invocation of personal feelings and emotions for every individual who journeys through. The first wall is representative of the Air Force. It is aluminum, signifying stealth and agility. It is a hollow wall. The second wall is the navy, steel, signifying material of strength and sleekness. It's also a hollow wall, ribbed construction, as in the building of the ships. The marine wall is concrete, signifying a solid yet malleable nature. The army is block, representing their rugged and orderly presence. The Coast Guard wall is stone, signifying the last wall of defense and protection of the homeland. There are pieces missing from the walls, and they signify the losses, setbacks, and defeats of each service, but they still stand and will continue to stand in defense of the United States of America. The windows in the walls are aligned so that each airman, sailor, marine, soldier, and Coast Guardsman are saluting in formation when you look at them from one end to the other. It symbolizes a jointness in which all of the services work together for the greater good. The architect aligned these windows along the center line of the memorial. At each wall is a window maintaining the silhouette, and they salute the United States flag. At the end of the memorial is the reflecting pond. The markers are arranged in chronological order from colonial wars to the future, and they make a defensive perimeter around the flag. There are 21 markers, and they face outward. This forms a defensive perimeter, which is one of the most basic forms of defense for ground forces, and those symbolically are protecting the American flag through the ages. The last marker is blank, to represent future conflicts, which our armed forces will unfortunately have to engage. The landscaping was designed by Jane Keel, and we have trees and shrubs. We have eastern rosebud, serviceberry, a good old maple tree, a Cuso dogwood. We have witch hazel, hydrangea, knockout roses, and some perennial flowers. The perennials on the fence side, which look perhaps to be irises, were planted clandestinely, but are a welcome addition by some well-wishers. There are benches donated by a local company, so you have time to sit and enjoy and think. The memorial is maintained by Silver Spring Township and Admiral Perry Votech Landscaping Department. The veterans remembered at the memorial are all U.S. service members from any of the 5 armed forces serving peacetime or conflict from the colonial period until today. This includes veterans from around the country, but because of proximity, most named veterans on the bricks and plaques are from central Pennsylvania. We have well over 500 veterans remembered on the bricks. We have 14 known Silver Spring Township veterans who died in service of their country. More complete details on the website under Veterans Roster. The campaign and mission markers found in the pool represent America's declared wars, undeclared campaigns, and other important missions that the military has performed. There are 21 markers used as the highest military salute, i.e., a 21-gun salute. The ribbons are major campaigns or theaters of war designated by the Department of Defense, but it does not include personal wear ribbons. The campaigns and war markers. Number 1 is Colonial Wars from 1636 to 1765. Ribbon uses Jack of Great Britain. The second is the Revolutionary War. The ribbon is scarlet with a white center stripe. Number 3 is the Maritime Protection of the Republic. There are 5 ribbons. Maritime Protection of the Republic, the French Naval War, the Barbary Wars, African Slave Trade Patrol, and operations against West Indian pirates. Number 4 is the War of 1812. Number 5 is the Indian Wars. Number 6 is the Mexican War. 7 is the Civil War from 1861 to 1865. Number 8 is Expeditionary Service, 1874 to present day. Currently there are 15, with Libya to be added. Navy Expeditionary, Marine Corps, Philippine Insurrection, China Relief, Latin America, Cuban Pacification, Nicaraguan Campaign, Haitian Campaign, Mexican Expedition, Dominican Campaign, Second Nicaraguan Campaign, Yangtze Service, China Service, Armed Forces Expeditionary, Kosovo 1999, and Libya 2011. Ninth stone is the war with Spain in 1898. Number 10 is World War I, which is 2 campaigns, World War I and the Army of Occupation of Germany. Number 11 is World War II, 1939 to 1952, with 10 campaigns. American Defense, Merchant Marine Defense, American Theater, Merchant Marine Atlantic War Zone, Asiatic Pacific Theater, Merchant Marine Pacific War Zone, European African Middle Eastern Theater, Merchant Marine, World War II Victory, Army and Navy Occupation Service, the Cold War, the Korean Service. The Cold War was from 1948 to 1991, and there was no official recognition but one action incorporated, humane action, in the Berlin airlift. 13 is the Korean Service. 14 is Vietnam Service. 15, Southwest Asia Service. 16, Afghanistan Campaign. And 17, the Global War on Terrorism, which started in 2001, and include the Global War on Terrorism Expeditionary and the Global War on Terrorism Service. 18 is the Iraq Campaign from 2003 to 2010. 19 is support of civil authorities, which is 1776 to the present, and honor service in the homeland from the Whiskey Rebellion to Hurricane Katrina. 20 is the international peacekeeping and humanitarian operations. And unfortunately, we have a 21, which is a blank marker representing the unknown future mission to show continuity of the past, the present, and the future. The committee members who helped to build this beautiful memorial include Mr. Vince DiFilippo, whose visionary for the memorial was the start of it, and he was a former board chairman of this township. Colonel John Maeda, Master Sergeant Kurt Minich, Dennis Shepard, who was a Vietnam veteran, Deb Snyder, who's an Army veteran, Reuben Bird Troutman, a Marine Corps veteran from Korea, Keith Marston, an Army veteran from Vietnam, and Jennifer Printy, daughter of World War II Army veteran. Major monetary donors to the memorial include Petroleum Products Incorporated, Derek C. and Margaret Hathaway Family Foundation, Volk Manufacturing, the Mechanicsburg Club, Cleveland Brothers, Remco Electrical Contractors, Barbara Folk, Groff Tractor and Equipment, Colonel John Maeda, the Greeley Family Foundation, the Foundation for Enhancing Communities, American Legion Post 109, VFW Post 6704. In-kind donors include Hemp Brothers, Pensy Supply, and Remco. There are also many, many more donors. You can check out our website, which is www.sstpveteransmemorial.com, and we will find a full list of everyone who has contributed at least $100. Many of the bricks that are donated by families who have multiple generations of people who have volunteered and served our country. And we encourage you to visit the memorial and do some exploring. The bricks for 2020 have been installed. They will be dedicated at our next live service. But in order to include them here, we will share with you the names, the service, and who donated them for this year's bricks that were purchased. Edward B. Reeder, U.S. Navy. Edward Reeder served in the U.S. Navy during World War II, sponsored by his wife, Mrs. Martha Reeder. Stanley E. Thompson, U.S. Army. Spec Stanley Thompson served in the U.S. Army from 1986 to 1990. Sponsored by Mr. and Mrs. George Thompson. Peter S. Du Bois, U.S. Air Force. Sergeant Peter Du Bois served in the U.S. Air Force from 1965 to 1968. Sponsored by Mr. and Mrs. Matthew Kitco. Harry Darcy, U.S. Navy. Petty Officer 2nd Class Harry Darcy served in the U.S. Navy from 1971 to 1975 as an air crew surveyor. His brick is sponsored by Mrs. Joyce Huber. James Darcy, U.S. Marine Corps. Staff Sergeant James Darcy served the U.S. Marines in World War II and the Korean War. Sponsored by Mr. Harry Darcy. George A. Fritz, U.S. Marine Corps. Private First Class George Fritz served in the USMC in World War II from 1943 to 1945. He is sponsored by Matthew Fritz. Larry W. Fritz, U.S. Army. Specialist Larry Fritz served in the U.S. Army in Vietnam from 1969 to 1971. Sponsored by Mr. Matthew Fritz. Matthew W. Fritz, U.S. Air Force. Senior Airman Matthew Fritz served in the U.S. Air Force from 1991 to 1997. Is sponsored by Mr. Matthew Fritz. The plaques that were dedicated and for May of 2020 are for Mr. William D. Greenlee, United States Army Air Corps. Staff Sergeant William Greeley served in World War II as a crewman on a B-24 Liberator heavy-duty bomb squadron. His plaque is sponsored by the Greeley Foundation. Reuben Bird Troutman, U.S. Marine Corps. Sergeant Bird Troutman served in the USMC for 10 years in Korea and the USMC Reserves. It is sponsored by his family. And also note that Reuben was a member of the Veterans Memorial Committee from the beginning. Mr. Bob Curtis, U.S. Navy. Second Class Petty Officer Bob Curtis served in the U.S. Navy from 1958 to 1961 as a cryptologist, sponsored by his wife, Mrs. Mary Curtis. Louis C. Schultz, U.S. Army. Sergeant Louis Schultz served in the U.S. Army during World War II, sponsored by his son, Louis Schultz, Jr. Louis E. Schultz, U.S. Army. Sergeant Louis E. Schultz served in the U.S. Army during World War I, sponsored by his grandson, Louis C. Schultz, Jr. Richard H. Linsenbaugh, U.S. Army. Staff Sergeant Richard Linsenbaugh served in the 8th Army Air Force during World War II, sponsored by Ms. Barbara Klein. Thomas E. Miller, U.S. Army. Thomas served in the U.S. Army from 1961 to 1964, sponsored by Mrs. Sue Miller. Harold Lee Gelbaugh, U.S. Navy. Harold Gelbaugh served in the U.S. Navy from 1989 to 2013. Sponsored by Tom and Sue Miller. Craig E. Book, U.S. Navy. Craig Book served in the U.S. Navy from 1970 to 1976. Sponsored by Mrs. Sue Miller and friends. We thank all these donations and these remembrances of our veterans. We thank you for your service and your donation. This is Andy Wheeler, who was 21 years in the submarine force of the Navy. Andy, why did you join the Navy?
Initially, I wanted to go to the Naval Academy. I had 3 younger brothers. We were only 6 years apart, top to bottom, so there wasn't money to send 4 boys to college. The military also offered the GI Bill, so I knew I'd be zippered one way or another. At the time, we ended up with great need. The race for space was on. The Russians were building nuclear submarines as fast as they could to try to catch up with our Nautilus. And so they needed crews for all the new submarines. And that required people that had solid mathematics background, trigonometry, algebra, college algebra, calculus, geometry, etc., and physics and chemistry. And those of us that had those qualifications had the same scores to go to the Naval Academy or to go to the Navy nuclear program. As it turned out, I ended up in the Navy nuclear program for 3 years. I went to school. The Navy put me through 3 years of school. And much of that was college accredited, but then it cemented my ability to continue my education throughout my career.
What would you say was the best part of your service?
I think the camaraderie. We were in a very unique position, a dangerous position. Submarines operate in hostile environment 24/7. So everybody has to learn the 140 or so systems on board, and there isn't any way to do anything but do it right, because you might be the only person in a given space or whatever when the emergency happens, and you have to know what to do to save the lives of your shipmates. So anybody that gets through the qualification to wear the insignia of the submarine force, the one on the top there, the dolphins, it's 2 dolphins holding onto the bow planes of a submarine. The dolphins are considered a peaceful, a symbol of a peaceful sea, and so that's a symbol of the submarine force. There's no expiration date on dolphins. Some of my very best friends, 55 years later, are the same guys that I sailed with in 1964.
How were you changed by your service?
Well, first thing, just because of the inherent dangers, you quickly realized that you were in this more serious environment. And at age 17, coming from a small town, I didn't know anything but that small little coal mining town in Pennsylvania. So I found myself in school, and all of a sudden the Cuban crisis came along, and here I'm going to school in the daytime and marching on the beach at night with an M14, and realize, hey, you're really in the military. And so by the time I was 21 years old, I had an incredible amount of experience already. And we had fun. We played together. We worked together. But when we were on duty, we were very serious people that doing a very serious job. The other thing with the military, and I think this probably accounts for all the services, they've got millions and millions of dollars worth of high-end equipment. You can't put that in the hands of incompetent people. The people that are in the military, they have to have good skills. They have to be trained. You're not going to get away with digging ditches or doing menial tasks. You have to be qualified physically up front and mentally up front to be of value in any of the services today.
Would you join again?
Absolutely, absolutely. The one thing that I know served me extremely well my entire career. Of course, I was in the technical career all my life, but we didn't have the ability at sea when something went wrong. You immediately had to fix it, maybe because it was an emergency, maybe because it was a piece of critical equipment, but there wasn't any time to say, well, we'll get it next week. You immediately took action and you got something done. And that kind of decision process could only take place with good training and repetitive training. And so my whole career, even when I had people that had master's and doctorate degrees in engineering, but sometimes I took the bull by the horns and got it done while they were still paralysis by analysis. And my entire career, my military taught me how to make decisions and lead.
What would you like to say to today's young people about serving in the military or serving in some manner towards their community?
Well, it was somewhat more difficult, or more difficult today than it was in my generation, because our parents are the ones that were in World War II and in Korea. We're very patriotic. We thought about the military a lot, and plus the Vietnam War came along, and that instigated the draft. So a lot of people found themselves in the military that weren't necessarily didn't want to be there. But those of us that wanted a good job and were thinking forward, the military was certainly something to be looked at and considered. And I'd do it again in a heartbeat. I enjoyed the military, and I was very successful with it. So I went to boot camp 5 days out of high school. There were 19 companies consisting of 1,280 shipmates. And of course, we were measured a dozen different ways, by test scores, by academic performance through the boot camp, by your physical fitness. And I swam on a Navy swim team, but I ended up first in my class of 1,280. And that kind of paved the way for lots of good things for me. So.
Thank you, Mr. Wheeler. Thank you for your service, and thank you for telling us about it.
My pleasure.
Hello, this is Tom Miller. Can you introduce yourself, please?
Yes, my name is Thomas Miller, and I'm a member of the Veterans Committee. I enlisted in the United States Army in 1961 and served until 1964. I was trained as a communication specialist and was posted to Japan, where I spent most of my military time working in a large communication center. In those days, communication was very different than it is today, and much of our work had to be done by hand, but it was good work, and my posting was considered at the time one of the best places you could be sent, because Japan is a beautiful country, and the city of Tokyo is one of the most cosmopolitan places on earth.
Why did you join the Army, Tom?
I joined the Army for a bunch of reasons. Number one, back in the day, there was a huge army. Over 1 million personnel were in the Army when I enlisted. And in the 1950s, when I had my education, you sort of got the impression that it was expected that you serve in some way. A second reason is there was a very significant draft, and many people were drafted into military services. So basically, I joined because I thought it was expected of me, and it was something that they often said you need to get out of your way. And I found it to be a remarkable time well spent.
What would you say was the best part of your service?
I think the best part of my service was where I was posted. It gave me an opportunity to live for over 2 years in a completely different part of the world. I was able to experience a large city, a different culture, different foods, beautiful architecture, history that was extremely different. And it paid off, I think, later on when I became a school teacher, having had that experience.
How were you changed by your service?
In a lot of ways. The military teaches you to learn to accept authority, to learn that there is something bigger than yourself, that the mission in front of the door that went into the communication center where I worked, there was a big sign said in Latin, Missio Prima, which basically means the job comes first. And you are taught that the job is bigger than you are, that you are larger than something else, and that there needs to be a fundamental order. And those things, I think, helped me later on in life.
Would you join again?
Yes,
Why?
definitively. I would join again because I still have that old-fashioned idea that a certain amount of service is owed to your country, not necessarily in the military. I have friends that were in the Peace Corps, others that did other sorts of charitable work, but basically because I think there is a time in a person's life when you owe something to the commonweal, as we often call it, the country, other people.
What would you like to say to today's young people about serving in the armed services or in the general community?
Pretty much what I just said. I think young people should give back a certain amount to the community, and to do it at a time when they are relatively young, to do this volunteer time, to meet people who are different than they are, to follow a course that won't be part of your life, will enrich you beyond measure. Military, I think, would teach you a great deal of wonderful things. Now, in today's world, military, like anything else, is a risk. You might be sent in harm's way. Many veterans have, and it is a risk of life, but I would still recommend it.
Thank you, Tom Miller, for your service to our country.
It was my pleasure, and thank you for interviewing me.
This is Mr. Kurt Minich. Could you please introduce yourself?
Hi, yes, my name is Kurt Minich. I served in the Army for almost 22 years in all three components, the active duty, Army National Guard, and Army Reserve. I'm from Mechanicsburg, Pennsylvania, and I currently work for the Defense Logistics Agency as a Department of Defense civilian.
Can you tell us why you joined the Army, Kurt?
So, almost 31 years ago, I joined the Army. I had a buddy of mine in high school who all senior year, I heard him about joining the military and joining the Army, and I never really considered it. Recruiters would call me constantly, would you like to consider joining the Army? And I kept declining and saying no thank you. My dad was in the Army for a little while. He was in the Army Reserves back in the 1950s. My brother was in the Army National Guard, and hanging out with my buddy Tom all senior long. And then after we graduated, he shipped out the following August. And I tried college for about 3 weeks, and I decided that college was not for me. And I just went ahead and walked out of the classroom one day and simply went down to the recruiter's office where my buddy was working with, and I decided to join. I thought it would be a great adventure. It was an opportunity to go over to Germany because I was able to sign a contract with the Army that guaranteed me to be stationed overseas. And again, I was looking for adventure, and I was looking to get away from home and kind of grow up a little bit. I was a smart aleck in high school, and I just needed time away, and I thought the Army would have been a great opportunity. And it turned out to be a great opportunity to be in the service.
What would you say was the best part of your service?
The best part of the service would be the opportunity to serve our nation, to serve overseas. I had a great experience living abroad, being stationed in Germany. I'll never forget when I first arrived, the commanding officer said, "You are a United States diplomat." And I said to myself, how in the world could I be a diplomat? And he said, everybody, every single soldier, whether you're a general or a private, which I was a private, you represent the U.S. Armed Forces, and you represent America. So every action that you take outside of this base is representative of our nation. And I took that to heart. So I made sure that I conducted myself properly when I went and traveled Europe. And that was definitely my biggest experience, is to, again, be 18 to 21 stationed overseas and just have a great time. I also think one of the best things about serving in the Army is, again, it is a chance to serve your nation, to kind of give back. And it was a great launch pad for my life. It taught me to grow up, taught me to be responsible, and it gave me a little bit extra money that I saved while I was in. And of course, when I came out, they offered the GI Bill, and I took full advantage of that as well.
How were you changed by your service?
Well, I went into the Army, again, a little smart aleck, not very disciplined, not very structured. And the Army taught me to be structured. The Army taught me self-discipline. The Army taught me a lot of things and like work ethic. The Army taught me how to deal with people of all backgrounds, whether in women and men and from people all over the nation. So it really taught me, instead of just dealing with folks that I grew up with, it taught me to work with other people of all ages too, whether it was a fellow private, 18 or 19 years old, or whether it was your commanding officer who might have been in his or her late 20s, early 30s. So I had a lot of exposure to different people of different ideas, of different backgrounds, and it taught you that not everything is the way you think it should be from your little hometown where you came from.
Would you do it again?
I would do it in a heartbeat. If I was 18, I'd sign up and say, where are you going to send me? The almost 22 years that I served, it was a wonderful experience, both active duty and as a reservist. It has helped me considerably with my civilian career, but definitely I would do it again. Everything's hindsight's 20/20, and I was fortunate that everything turned out just fine with my service, both my deployments and the people that I had met along that journey. So again, in hindsight, it was a wonderful experience. Unfortunately, not every soldier, sailor, airman, Marine has a wonderful experience, but everybody does have an experience, and I like to think that everybody would serve again and make the sacrifices that it takes. But I thoroughly enjoyed my time in the service. I kind of miss it in a way. I miss some of the people. I don't miss the weekend drills, of course, but I do miss some of the folks that I had served with over the years.
What would you like to say to today's young people about serving in the armed services or their community in general?
In today's world, I think it's a me generation. A lot of folks think about, what do I get? What are my individual rights? I think joining the military, regardless of branch, I think it teaches you to be a member of a larger team. It teaches you the obligations that you have, both to the nation, to your community, to your fellow comrade in the service. So I highly recommend our young folks to think about joining. And if they can't join for whatever reason, they should think about giving back to their local community. And there are hundreds of ways that everybody can give back to their community. And I believe that the Army and the military teaches you that as being part of a larger team. But I think we need to get back to, what is your obligation to a nation? What is your obligation to your local community? And I think that's really important. If we can look past ourselves sometimes and think about the greater good, I think our individual lives can be actually enriched and fulfilled with purpose. And so I challenge every young person in our society to look for that purpose, look for that sense of purpose, and how can I give back?
Thank you, Kurt.
Thank you, Ginny.
For your service.
You're very welcome.